We will now move on to some of the other tax announcements and also measures to support businesses in light of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm delighted to welcome Chris Connor, one of our tax partners, who's going to talk about a number of these aspects. Chris, if we could start with, we're going to cover, as I say, the coronavirus measures. We're going to look at the changes to R&D tax relief and credits, expenditure credits. Thought we'll also look at the changes to structural building allowances, the announcements on business rates, which again probably links back to some of the measures for coronavirus support, and also conclude probably on the employment allowance. So if we may, shall we start with it was really a budget of two halves. There was significant measures to support businesses, individuals, and protect income and the health of the country yesterday in light of the coronavirus pandemic. He made a number of announcements, obviously some to help individuals and businesses and some to support the health services, the challenges we all face in the current climate. Perhaps you could talk about some of the announcements he made specifically in relation to looking after people's income or helping support income through to the actual support he gave to businesses directly.
Okay, well, I mean, it was interesting that clearly coronavirus did play a major part in everything that was said yesterday. The government are clearly expecting this to spread to some extent, and that businesses are going to be in significant difficulty for a period of time over the coming months. So, number of measures introduced. The first of which was talking about statutory sick pay. From an individual's perspective, you ordinarily will get statutory sick pay from day 4 of your illness. The government have said that if you are off for a coronavirus-related sickness, so whether that be because you've actually got the virus or whether you're self-isolating, then effectively you will get statutory sick pay paid by your employer from day 1. So that's great from the individual's perspective. In terms of the employer, clearly they're going to be concerned that they've got all these people off sick, not work, not contributing to the labour force, and they've got to be paid. So as a measure to help employers, the government have said that they will effectively pay up to 14 days per individual of statutory sick pay. They will reimburse the employer for that payment. Now that will only apply to businesses with less than 250 employees, so it's a small, medium-sized entity relief really, but no doubt it will be very well received. I think we've still got to wait to see how the mechanism for effectively getting that money back into the businesses is going to work, and I think the government are working on that, but I suspect we will see some more announcements on that in the very near future.
He also made some announcements. Obviously businesses will possibly see their income and turnover go down, and particularly those in certain sectors, whether it's leisure, tourism, entertainment and retail. And he made some announcements, I think, around the time to pay scheme through to the introduction of a loan scheme for support some of the businesses adversely affected.
Basically, they acknowledge that productivity is going to be down, business income is going to be down because of lack of labour force, lack of items in the supply chain potentially. So they acknowledge that they've got to support businesses throughout this period, and funding may get tight. Businesses are going to struggle from cash flow over coming months. So they've said that they've introduced a coronavirus loan support scheme, which effectively means that where a business needs to borrow money to get it over this difficult period, then the government will stand in and act as guarantor for up to 80% of that loan value. So again, that will shore up to some extent where businesses are struggling on cash flow. I think the maximum loan under this provision is going to be 1.2 million per business, and they've earmarked something like £1 billion, I think, effectively as a pot to sort of fulfil that requirement. So yes, there's a loan scheme. We've also seen, like I say, time to pay. So relaxation of time to pay. Now, this has effectively been around for some time now. So if a business is struggling to pay its tax liabilities, whether it's corporation tax, VAT, pay-as-you-earn, whatever it is. If it is upfront with the revenue, it can talk to a specialist time to pay unit and agree and negotiate an effective extended period to pay its tax liabilities. So the process would normally involve you explaining your circumstances to HMRC, telling them that you can't afford to actually pay your liability when it's due. They would normally look at your cash flow forecasts and look at what other sources of funding you've got available to you. And between you, you'd come to some form of a compromise agreement whereby they would extend your time to pay your tax liabilities. So long as the revenue are effectively confident that you're going to fulfill your obligations under the agreement and you're going to pay your tax over a reasonable amount of time, they will normally help you with that. So again, I think the government are saying, well, we envisage that there's so many more businesses that are going to be in financial difficulty over the coming months. We need to effectively try and share that burden. So we will bolster up our time to pay unit. And I think we've got 2,000 new people coming into that call centre to help take these calls. And effectively, we will help you defer and prolong the time that you have to effectively keep up to date with your taxes if you can justify the need.
I think the other change he made was around business rates, and I think it was retail business rates, extending those businesses that would receive the benefit or the discount. And particularly, obviously, we talked earlier about that. Really, it is probably those retail businesses where consumers decide through self-isolation or even lockdowns or whatever it is to actually not go into shops or not to attend or visit pubs, restaurants, the leisure activity. Yeah. What was the scope there? What did he bring in there?
Well, like you say, I think they envisage lots of people not spending money out in pubs and restaurants and bars and hotels in the coming months. And I think there always was sort of talk of giving some business rate concession to the retail sector. But what they've done is effectively they've said, well, we're going to look at the retail sector. We're also going to look at the leisure industry. So, pubs, restaurants, hotels, small hotels, caravan parks, museums, sports clubs, all those areas effectively, and effectively if any of those have business premises that they have a rateable value on of less than 51,000 a year, then they are going to get a year's grace effectively from 31st of March of this year, where they will be business rate free for an entire year. So again, a very valuable concession to help those businesses get over this difficult time. With regards to pubs, if they have a rateable value in excess of 51,000, but it's less than 100,000, then there's a one-off concessionary reduction in the rate value for them of £5,000 for the coming year.
So overall, I think they announced some broad measures to help and deal with the current situation. I suppose some of the challenges are actually about individuals and businesses actually being able to access in a timely fashion or easily that support, whether it's loan funds or anything else. And equally, for a lot of businesses, that will be helpful. But actually, if you're currently squeezed, you may find it further pressure down the line. I suppose it depends on how long we experience this situation and how resilient businesses are at the end of the day.
Yeah, again, nobody quite knows how this is all going to unwind, do we? So I think what this is a number of flexes and measures that will just help those businesses over the next 12 months. And they're designed really to be of wide application. So, the business rates, the employee statutory sick pay, they're trying to hit as big a population of the business community as they possibly can with a varied range of measures so that they can all team and laid as they need to.
Thank you. If we now may move on to R&D expenditure tax credits. The government, or rather the Chancellor, announced yesterday, I think, a significant number of measures or approaches, including public sector spend, to actually drive innovation, R&D, take us to the forefront of new product development and new ideas. And in particular for a lot of businesses, the R&D tax credits have been very useful and very supportive. He made a number of changes. generally. What was the key change then around R&D tax credits?
Well, like you say, it was interesting to note yesterday that R&D was mentioned consistently throughout the whole budget speech. So the government clearly see this as an avenue which they want to fund better and put more money into, and they see that as probably a good opportunity for the country to move the economy forwards. Just to sort of briefly tap into what R&D tax credits are. So this is a relief that's available to companies only, and what it's there to do is effectively to designed to reward risk takers. So those people who within their business are developing new products or pushing technical boundaries in terms of their product range or their processes. So they're doing something that leads to an advance in knowledge in their particular industry. Not necessarily people in laboratories in white coats. It can be people that are designing new products or honing a process to make it more efficient, less costly. So we will see R&D in many industries, and effectively this relief is there to give you a hugely enhanced tax deduction for any costs that are deemed to be eligible R&D expenditure. So your main cost will be your staff, so your people will spend time doing R&D, so you'll get a proportion of their salary costs as an R&D eligible cost. You will maybe consume raw materials as part of your R&D process. You will use subcontractors to help you with your R&D sometimes, and all of these roll up into an often sizable number. And for a small, medium-sized company, that number, once converted into an eligible cost, gets uplifted by 130%, and that creates an extra tax deduction. Now, when you boil it all down to the value in pound notes, it's broadly 25% of the cost that you put into R&D, you will get back through this incentive. So it's massively valuable. In terms of announcements yesterday, not a great deal in terms of things that are going to affect the day-to-day R&D relief, other than the intention that clearly we're going to put more money into it. But for companies that are in the RDEC scheme, so large companies predominantly, there is an above-the-line tax credit that we get as part of that relief, and that has gone up from 12% to 13%. So, a slight increase in the value of the large company RDAC credit. But I think more interesting is the fact that it looks like there is an intention to keep cranking up this R&D relief and make it easier to claim, so that all the businesses that are entitled to it hopefully can benefit from it, because it's a hugely valuable relief.
Thank you. If we may now move on to the Structural Building Allowance, perhaps you'd start by just simply saying what the allowance is, and then what announcement was made in the budget and who it might affect or impact.
Okay, so this is a relatively new relief, the Structural Buildings Allowance. It's effectively a relief to give you a form of capital allowance, so a tax deduction for buildings, effectively. It was introduced in June of last year for contractual expenditure from October 2018. And what it does, it says that where you are building a commercial building, where you are refurbishing a commercial building, extending a commercial building, wherever you're incurring capital cost effectively on a commercial building, then historically you would not get any relief on the actual structure of the building in most cases. This relief effectively says that you can have tax relief on the structure, the shell. You get it at 2% per year over a 50-year period on a straight line basis. Okay, so what was announced yesterday was that the 2% is actually going up to 3%. So 3% per year. If you are already claiming the Structural Buildings Allowance because you've incurred expenditure since October 2018 and you are claiming that 2% rate, then effectively from 31st of March this year you just flip over onto the 3% rate. I think the important point to note here is that we make sure we don't get lazy in terms of building expenditure and just assume that the whole cost is going to get relieved at 2 or 3%, because quite often when we do incur considerable costs on new buildings, on refurbishments. There will be significant costs within the building that will qualify for a much better rate of relief. So things like heating systems, plumbing, electrics, cabling, Wi-Fi, all that kind of thing. We can actually extract those from the building cost and get them probably at 100% in most cases in the year of expenditure. So even though we're getting relief on buildings, we've still got to make sure that we do extract other costs that are entitled to other relief to make sure we advance that tax relief.
Thank you. That's most useful. If we now may move on to business rates, I know we've probably covered business rates with the coronavirus provisions, but I mean, there's been a lot of talk over the last few years or even longer about the challenge the high street has in terms of business rates and the fact that those on digital online businesses have often a lower cost. But were there any reliefs to changes to business rates yesterday that would benefit businesses generically, or was it all linked to the coronavirus provisions?
Well, predominantly it was linked to coronavirus, wasn't it? I mean, there's like you say, there's been a long-term debate as to whether or not high street businesses that are paying business rates can remain competitive when they're competing against the internet companies that don't have that equivalent cost. And I think the message coming across yesterday was that business rates are going to be subject to a full review at some stage in the not too distant future. There was a couple of other wider announcements yesterday to do with companies and businesses that are in receipt of small business rates relief. They're going to get a one-off £3,000 rebate, and companies that are in receipt of the rural rates relief are also going to get a £3,000 rebate in the coming months, and I think they've earmarked something like 2.2 billion to cover that. So it looks like business rates across the board are, certainly for small, medium-sized entities, are getting some form of a relief.
And finally, Chris, perhaps we could just talk about the changes that were made or announced yesterday around the employment allowance.
Yeah, sure. So employment allowance, this is the allowance that has been around since 2014. It effectively gives businesses a reduction in their Class 1 secondary NIC liability. So that was £3,000 up until yesterday. It has now been increased to £4,000. Interestingly, though, we did have a number of amendments coming into employment allowance with effect from April this year anyway that were already on the cards. Effectively, it is being scaled back a little bit so that in order to maintain your eligibility for the allowance, you've got to claim it every year. There's no automatic rollover. And you've got to be able to demonstrate that you paid less than £100,000 Class 1 NI in the previous year. The revisions also bring the employment allowance within the de minimis state aid provisions, which is a significant layer of added complication, because effectively it means that you've got to make sure that you have not exceeded your de minimis state aid contributions from government sources within the previous 3 years. So businesses are allowed to have up to 200,000 of de minimis state aid in any 3-year period. Now, when I talk about de minimis state aid, we're talking about government incentives, so grants and things like that. So if you've had de minimis state aid, chances are there will be paperwork that came with the funding that will tell you it's de minimis state aid. But as part of these new measures, you are going to have to effectively check that you are under the threshold, that you're still entitled to claim this employment allowance. So a bit of an extra layer of complication. But the good news is it's gone up to 4,000 from 3.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for joining us today for our special budget podcast. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Street Sessions, our budget special podcast. Further details on the budget and how it will affect individuals and businesses are on our website, which includes a budget summary guide, details of the latest tax rates, and further articles on some of the announcements made. Other information concerning the budget is also included in our app, which again, details of which can be found either in the App Store or on our website. Thank you very much for joining us today.